Hi good people, Titus here, and today we're going to be creating a very simple dialogue system in Unreal Engine. This will be a beginner style tutorial in creating a fundamental RPG mechanic that you can add to your projects. Let's not waste any time and just jump right into it. Alright, so starting off, I am using the third person character template, although I did make a change to the player character, so instead of the 3D mannequin, we're using this little sprite flipbook. Just to kind of keep it more in line with the theme I'm going for. But we basically want to create a way where my player can walk around, see an NPC, push a button, and then talk to that NPC and some dialogue shows on the screen. So what we'll need to accomplish this goal is we'll need to create some sort of input system that can, consume our input and actually take an action. After the input, we'll need to create a widget. That widget, we want to do two things. We of course want to display the text on the screen, but we also mainly want to be able to create a typing effect, which is very classic to RPGs, as well as a mechanism to where we can clear the text off the screen because we're going to reuse the widget. The other thing we're going to need is of course an NPC, so a non-playable character, which is basically someone in the world to talk to. And then we need to tie all these systems together. We can of course normally you'd use a game manager, but I think in this prototype, to keep it simple, we'll tie all the logic together in the player blueprint. All right, so let's go ahead and come into our input folder. We'll go to actions, we'll right click, select input, and we're gonna create a new input action. I'm gonna call this IA_talk, or you can call it chat or interact or whatever you wanna name it. We'll double click to open it up, and the default settings are actually good, which is digital boolean. That's true, false, yes, no, basically a button press, which is perfect. That's exactly what we need. So we can leave that alone and go back to the input folder. Now we need to open up our input mapping context file. Because I'm using third person template, there's already one created called imc_default. If we open this up, this basically just holds all your input actions. If I expand out, you can see the default ones that are already created. We'll just hit the plus sign to add a new slot, and then we'll fill that slot with the IA_talk that we just created. And then from here, you can assign all your different button presses or gamepad buttons to this action. So I'm gonna hit the little record button and just press the E key, and I'm just gonna assign the E key to this action just to make it simple. So we'll save that, and then our input system's actually good. So we're on to the widget portion of this. So I have a blueprints folder that I made here, and normally you would just right click, go to user interface, select widget blueprint, and then choose user widget. In this case, I've already created one called WBP_dialogue. So I'm going to double click to open this up, and I'll walk you through what I've created. Just mainly created it to save some time on this video because it's going to be a little bit long. I added a simple canvas panel. I then added a border object. The border object has a lot of settings on it. I basically anchored it center bottom, and then I set the left and right offset at 100, and then the Y size at 400 to give this sort of detail here. I then set the padding to 40. That's important because I have this white border. So that 40 padding will basically push the text inside the black portion so it doesn't get covered up with the white. And then under the brush settings, I set the tint to be black, and then I set the draw as from image, I changed it to a rounded box. And then for the outline settings, I set the outline to be white. I did a fixed radius of 40, and then I rounded the top left and top right corners at 40. And that's how I got this little style right here. I also added to the border a scroll box component. The important takeaway on the scroll box is that I checked the is variable and I gave it a name. You will have to do that as well, but I left all the other settings default. So it's just a vertical scroll box, and that'll come into play a little bit later. Text blocks, I added basically a child text box to the scroll box, and that is important. I also made it a is variable checked and gave it a name because we're going to be influencing this through code. And just as an example, we can maybe throw in some example text so we can see how it looks. The other thing you'll want to do, or that we did, or that I did I should say, is I adjusted the font size to be a little bit bigger And then I also enabled auto wrap text so it fits vertically. And then we'll use the scroll function in code to actually scroll it down. So that's just the pre-setup here. If we head over to the graph, we can actually begin coding this thing. We're not going to be working with pre-construct or tick. We will, however, work with construct. So we need to do two things. We need to create the typing effect, and we need to create a way to clear the text. So we'll do the clear text first because it's easy. We'll do a custom event. We'll name it clear dialog text. And this is basically just going to grab our text block, which is, our dialog on our widget. And then we're just going to pull into the set text widget function here. And then we'll just pass in an empty text value to kind of wipe it out or clear it out. Now to make the typing effect, we're going to need some variables, which we're also going to want to clear in this event. So we might as well create them now. We're going to need one variable that we can call our NPC dialog that we'll set to be a string. This will be the full dialog component that we pass in from the NPC. So I can actually bring this over, because when we clear it, we want to wipe it out to basically be nothing. The other variable we'll need is the typed character. This is going to be a individual single character, which is what we use to type in onto the screen to get that typing effect as it kind of builds out. And we also want to be able to set this to be empty when it's done. The other variable that we'll need is an index. The index is going to be an integer. We need this to be able to keep track of our position in our NPC dialog string to see where we're at as we're cutting away individual text and adding it to the screen. So we'll want to set this to be 0 when we clear out the text. It's basically reset the index. And then on the event construct, we can just simply call the clear dialog text. And that completes the clear portion. So that code is basically done. The typing is a little more complicated. So we'll first start off, we'll add a custom event. I'm going to call this my typing effect. This one is a little bit different than the previous events because it will have an input. The input, we can just maybe name text, and we do have to set it to be a string value. This is important. So this is what's going to be called from like the NPC blueprint. The NPC will pass in its string or its dialog string value through this pin here. So there's a few different ways you can architect this. You would normally think you could maybe get a character array from the string and then pass this into a for each loop, and then you'd have individual access to the characters as well as their position, and then you can maybe loop into like some delay before you print it into the console or add it to the widget. This, however, will not work the way you think it does, and that has to do with the fact with how for loops and for each loops and just loops in general, how they work in a game engine. So if you were to do this, it would basically iterate across the entire string, but it would do it so fast that the text would appear on screen instant. So it would just kind of like show up. Even if you add a delay in your actual loop or your for each loop, the loops are set to happen asynchronously. So they're going to kind of continue to iterate even if they hit a delay. Everything after the delay won't actually call, so it will honor that portion of it, but it'll continue to iterate through the loop. And then once the delay is finished, whatever iteration on the loop it's on, which would be the end because it's going to finish before, that'll be what gets passed in to the rest of your code after the delay. So it's basically just, it's still going to not give you the effect that you're looking for. The only way you can really do it, there are really only two ways, is you would have to create a recursive function or a recursive event where you basically do something like this, and then at the end of it, you call the same event or same function. So it's recursive, it keeps happening. That's one way you can do it. You just need to set up some logic so you can kick yourself out of an infinite loop. The other way to do it is to use a timer, and that'll be how I actually show you in this demonstration. So let's go ahead and do that. So when the typing effect gets called, I want to store the NPC's dialogue, so I will pass it in and store it like that. And then I can come into a set timer by, you could do by function, I'm going to do by event, just because I'm using a lot of, I kind of treat events and functions the same in Unreal because they kind of are, oddly enough. And this will basically call some event on some time interval. So we can actually right click and promote the time to be a variable that we can maybe name our typing speed. And then I think starting off, I will compile, and then I'm going to set the typing speed to be 0.01. So something relatively small. So it's going to happen pretty quick. Now there is looping logic, so you could hypothetically just do your gate controller where you maybe check the index is greater than the length of the dialogue string and have that result control the loop. But the problem with that is this only gets checked once. So it would evaluate to true, and then it would run the event on a loop infinitely. So what you really need to do is you need to kick out the loop inside that event. You can't do it outside because this is only going to really get called once. So that won't reevaluate. So what we can do is we can promote this one to a variable. We'll call it our timer reference, and we're going to use that to kick ourselves out of the loop later. So let's go ahead and add a custom event. We'll just call typing, and we'll pass this into the event. So this is what gets fired every 0.1 seconds or whatever we set that to. When this gets fired, we want to get our typed character. So we're basically going to be setting this. The way we determined the typed character is we take our NPC's dialogue. So we hold control, drag that out to get a getter. And then we can pull off this and do a string function called mid. This is effectively just a substring. So if you know what a substring is, you basically just give it a start and an end position, and then it will cut out or subtract, the text for that string and then return that to you. Unreal uses a start position and it uses a count, which is the end position. We're only ever going to be typing one character at a time, so our end position is always going to be 1, or the count in this case is going to be 1. The start position is dynamic, we don't know it. That's why we're using the index. So we can take our index, pass this in, and that'll be how we control the position. So it'll start at index of 0, which you can see right here, and then it'll move over to the right 1. It'll cut that character out, and then we can return that into our actual string. But there's a problem with doing that is because you'd only show one character on the screen at a time. So what you actually need to do is get your typed character. So I did kind of lie on how this worked earlier. This is technically getting filled up. So we are going to use the append function to add that one character to the typed character, and then add that result to our typed character variable. So obviously, first iteration, this is empty, right? There's nothing in here. So we get the first character, we store it, we add it to nothing, and then we store it in the typed character. The second time this gets called, we get our index as 1 over, so then we get the second character over, and then we get a reference to the first character we already stored, and we add the second characters. Now this is technically typing 2 characters. So it's basically 1, 2, 3, and it just kind of counts over. So this is going to be basically the logic that actually fills this up. We just need to show this on the widget. So the same way we cleared out the widget, we can just duplicate that, but we will pass in this result here, and that'll fill up the screen. And last thing we need to do is really just increase the index. So if you do the get index, you can do a ++ or an increment, because we need a way to basically increase the count. So we have a way to basically go through our entire string for the dialogue. And then a nice to have is we'll take our scroll box reference, we'll do a getter, and that scroll box is what we created right here, because remember we made it is variable, so that's it right there. So I can take that scroll box and I can call a handy function called scroll to end. And then basically this will cover us in situations where your dialogue is bigger than the actual box. So it'll actually automatically scroll down as it fills up, which is nice. And this logic is actually good. There's just one problem with it. If you were to run this as it is, this is an infinite loop. It will continue to run infinitely. It'll still work, but you know, it's obviously not great. You don't want to do that. So you want a way to kick yourselves out of this loop. So we can just add a branch node. And then when the branch evaluates to true, we can just get our timer reference and do the old clear and invalidate timer by handle. And that will kick you out of the loop. You just need to figure out some way to actually evaluate some condition that will call this. There's a few different ways you could do it. Just off the top of my head, we can just get our index. We could check if that is greater than the NPC's dialogue length. So when you get the length of a string, it returns a number. So like if I have the word hi, hi, the length of that string would be 2. So when the index is increasing over here, eventually it's going to exceed the length of the dialogue. And when that happens, it'll call this invalidate timer and kick it out. Which is good. All right, so that pretty much completes the code for the widget. So we're good here. Now we can move on to the NPC. So we'll go into our blueprints folder, right click, do another blueprint class. This time we'll do a type actor, and I'm just going to call this BP underscore NPC. So we'll double click to open that up, and we don't have to get too crazy with this. We're just going to add a sphere collision so we can check when something overlaps this NPC. And I'm going to multiply this by 4 to make it a bigger sphere. And then I'm simply going to add in a sprite paper flipbook, like so. A nice to have is we can come into the construction script, and then I can take that flipbook, and then I can actually do a set flipbook function, hook up the execution pins, and then on the new flipbook, I can actually promote this to a variable called NPC sprite or flipbook or whatever, and make it instance editable by clicking a little eyeball, which basically makes it kind of like public, so you can set it in the editor. And then the default value, I'm going to set it to be this missing image that I configured earlier. That way, if we add in the NPC here, I'm going to reset its world position and then just kind of move it over. It's a little bit small, but it'll let you know. It's just a visual cue to the developer that, oh, I forgot to add the image here. It's not a problem for this prototype because we're only going to have a few, but in larger projects where you have maybe dozens or hundreds, you know, sometimes you can miss one, and that's just an easy visual aid that will remind you to set the flipbook in the editor. I think it's a little bit small though, so I'm going to select the flipbook and I'm going to scale it to 5 just to make it a little bit bigger. We also want to add in a variable that we can call maybe just NPC dialogue. We're going to make this public as well, and this will be a string value. All right, that looks pretty good so far. So we will go to our event graph. I'm not going to be working with any of this really. We can just grab our sphere collision. We'll add an event for the sphere. We'll do begin overlap, and we'll select the sphere again, right click, add event for that sphere, and we'll do an end overlap. So when something enters the sphere, we'll check if it is the player. Now remember, I'm using the third person template, so my player is BP underscore third person character. We pass the other actor as the object field. I'm going to duplicate that and do the same thing down here. So when a something enters the sphere, we check if it's the player. If it is, we're going to do something. When something leaves the sphere, we check if it's the player, and if it is, we do something as well. We haven't defined what that is, so we'll go ahead and set that up now. Normally you would do this through a game manager, but I think just to make this video as short as possible, because it's already getting a little long, we're just going to do it in the player object. So I'm going to come over to my player character here, and then in the event graph, we can create some events. First thing we'll do is, I think we'll do an event begin play. When the game starts, I want to create a widget. The widget I want to create is the dialog widget. I want to store it as a variable. So this will be dialog HUD reference. All right, so now that I have the HUD created, it's not added to the viewport, it's just instantiated. We need a way to basically, we need to figure out when we want to add it, right? Well, we created an input system. So we called an event called or an input action called IA_talk. So when the player hits that button to talk, we need to check something. So I'm going to add a branch. We haven't figured out our condition yet, but we can in a second. If that evaluates to true, then what we can do is we can use our dialog reference that we created and add it to the viewport. So this will basically grab our widget and add it to the screen and make the player as the owner. After we've done that, we can use our HUD reference again and call any event on that widget. So the one we created was called typing effect. So the typing effect takes in an input called text. So we need a way to pass that in. So of course we'll create a variable called dialog text, and then we'll make it a string. You can call it whatever you want, doesn't matter. And then we're just going to pass this in here like so. You might be wondering, like, well, it's empty. How do we fill it? You're right. So we need to set up a way to actually fill this variable with the NPC's dialogue. So we can do that with another custom event. We'll call prepare dialog, and prepare dialog will of course take an input called NPC text, or whatever you want to name it. It is, of course, does have to match the data type of string. And then we just take our dialog and we fill it like so. We also want another variable called can talk. This one is, of course, going to be a Boolean, because we want a way to make sure the player can't call the dialogue when they're not near an NPC. So we're going to set this to true on the prepared side, and then if we go up to our talk, we can actually just pass this in over here, and we'll basically check to make sure the player can talk before we actually add the widget to the screen. Because otherwise there's not going to be any event for the dialogue to pass through, so it's not going to work the way you think it is. So then we can just do our last thing, which is add a custom event called clear dialog, because we're reusing the same widget. We're not recreating a widget for each NPC. We need a way to basically empty out these variables when we're all done with everything. So we can grab our HUD reference and duplicate it. We need to do two things. We need to remove the widget from parent, which will just take it off the screen. It won't destroy it, so it still exists, so we can use it later. And then we want to call a function or an event, actually in this case it would be an event, on that widget. And you can probably guess which one. It is, of course, the clear dialog text, which we can see over here. So we'll call that and hook up these pins like so. And then, of course, we will empty our dialog and we will reset our Boolean value to be false. And this is pretty much the entire code for the player blueprint. So there's not a whole heck of a lot, but our player blueprint's also acting like a game manager, so it's a little wonky, but it'll work. Now we set up the code, we did not call it, so we created these custom events here. So we do have to go back into the NPC blueprint. So we're back over here on this one. And then when we begin overlap on the sphere, as the player, we want to call the prepare dialog. And then we have the NPC text. For the default value, I'm just going to add 3 periods. And then I'm just going to pass this in here. That'll be a default in case we forget to set it in the world. That way the player actually gets some actual text. And then when the player leaves the NPC sphere, we want to call the clear dialog event. And that's actually all the code on the NPC. So the NPC doesn't have a whole lot going on. So we're actually good to kind of test this out. So what we'll do is I am going to set this one to be a skeleton. And then we'll push him down just a smidge. Then I'm going to hold the Alt key, drag off. And I'll make this one be an orc. And then for the text, I'll set I'm an orc. Nice to meet you. And then for the skeleton, I'll forget to set anything. So if I come over here and I press the interact button, you can see it types out what we did. When I leave and exit the widget, if I hit the type button, nothing happens. I have to actually go interact with the orc before it shows up. And if I go to the skelly, you can see we never set any dialogue, so it's just the standard 3 little dots. And then we can replace that. How's it going? I'm a bag of bones. Go away now. So then we can come over here and our text now gets typed on the screen like so. And then remember, it's a simple system, but you can control some things like the typing speed. If you do a lot of text, you can adjust how it scrolls as well. So there's a few little mechanics you can kind of do here. But all right, everyone, I think we'll cut the video here, but I hope you found some informative value that you can take into your own projects. But as always, thanks for watching. Consider subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.